Okay, so this is making a kettle in Fusion. So I found a kettle model on GrabCAD and it was in Fusion format. Now it wasn't, it didn't have any design history, didn't have any features in there. It was just a dumb solid, but it was something to provide inspiration and provided a good starting point. So here it is, just spinning it around. There's a few flaws with it. It's like not entirely symmetrical, maybe a little bit lumpy and bumpy in places, but it gives us a good place to start. So here I am. I'm just lowering it down to the origin point, so everything is based off the base, and just spinning it around just to make sure it looks good, looks centralized. Now I want to create the main kind of shape. It's kind of like that bell shape of the main body. And in order to do that, I can create some profiles moving on up. I mean, one way we could make that shape is to use a revolve, but that would produce probably a quite basic, difficult to modify shape at the end of the day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some planes and I'm going to draw some ellipses, and on each of those planes I'm going to try and recreate the cross section through the kettle, and then I'm going to join all those ellipses up as a loft. And the reason I'm going to use the ellipse is because I can have a lot of control over the width and the length, and can also maybe change the spline and change the angle of attack as it's going into each point. And also with the loft, because they're all the same kind of shapes on each level, it's going to make it better to loft. So here we go. Here I'm starting to draw just a kind of general ellipse or circle on the bottom plane there, just to act as a base for the whole thing. And now I'm going to do a cross section through one of the planes that I've created. I've put these planes at places where I think the geometry is changing in an interesting way, like maybe at the waist or maybe somewhere near the spout. Or and also, by the way, I'm also making the shape taller than it needs to be so that I have some extra material in order to work with later on. So here we go. I've got a cross section through the kettle there, and I'm drawing another ellipse on that level, and I'm trying to follow the kind of general shape of the kettle. And I basically do this for the next few planes, so I'm going to maybe speed up this section of the video so that you can see what I'm doing. So just doing a kind of token final shape at the top there. It doesn't have to be perfect. And as you can see, I've now got a host of profiles, and I'm going to do a loft, a solid loft. Click each profile in turn. It's finding it easier to join because it's the same kind of shape, so it knows which points to join where. And hey presto, I've got a kind of basic shape for the body. And you can sort of unhide the original kettle just to see how far off we are. It doesn't have to be perfect this time around, but the thing with those ellipses is they're all parametric, they're all modifiable, so we can change this body shape at any point and all the changes will cascade down. So now I'm going to look at the handle. So the way I've approached this is I've drawn a sketch that forms a kind of spine for the handle shape. I've used a spline there with 5 points. And I'm just going to fiddle with the handles on that spline in order to sort of make it less curvy where it needs to be less curvy. Get it in the ballpark, basically. So when I'm happy with that spline, it's on the center line, by the way. Now it's time to put some reference planes along the length of that spline. Ideally I would put it on the dots, but I couldn't see an option to do that in Fusion. So there is a plane along path option. So I'm using the plane along path. So I'm selecting the spline and I'm going to put one at the 0 point, so it's the beginning of the spline, and then 25, 50, 75 and 100%. So then I have these planes, and much in the same way as I created the profiles on the main body, I'm going to use these planes to slice through the existing handle and just sort of get an idea of what kind of profiles to put on each of these planes. Might be a little bit overkill. I mean, we could have done a simple extrude, but this is a completely controllable kind of approach. So if we did want to have a much more organic shape at each point, we can do that. I mean, I think on this handle, it's a little fatter at the top and it tapers down to something thinner at the bottom. So that's what I'm doing here. Now, on each of these profiles, I'm using a spline with 4 points, and I'm going to try and make this as symmetrical as possible. At each of those points, I'm using the vertical horizontal tool in the Fusion sketch section to make each of those spline handles vertical and or horizontal. I'm also going to make those points horizontal to each other or the ones vertical to each other. I'm also going to make the distance of those points at the side equal to each other, and I'm going to make those handles the same, equal to each other, so it's going to be completely symmetrical. Get it close to the profile as possible. You can see it's kind of not exactly a perfect ellipse, it's sort of a little bit flatter on one side, so that's why I've gone with this kind of sketch approach. And then basically I do that for the rest of the planes, the 50% one, 75% one. I mean, I have the handle to refer to there. At the 0 and the 100% planes, I create ellipses, kind of using judgment, kind of using a bit of guesswork to see how the best way to finish off the handle is. But yeah, just some way to create a nice considerate handle shape. So eventually I've got all these profiles along this spine, and then I create another loft, a solid loft. Selecting profiles one by one. because these ellipses all have kind of 4 dots to them. The program knows where to join them. And then I can use the spine as well, just to help define that shape a bit more. Got the wrong guide type selected there. I want centerline, then I click on the spine, and hey presto, there's a handle. Now, it does look a little bit straight in one of those sections, maybe a little bit lumpy. I can come back and fix that later on. But I think what I do attempt here is maybe modify that spine sketch. There we go. And maybe just move one of those dots a little bit further along. Just to take out that flatness there. I don't know if it's entirely successful, but as you can see, everything's updated. So yeah, everything is parametric and modifiable. And there's the handle. So now we have a body for the main body, and we also have a body for the handle. So now I'm looking at the spout section. And my approach here was that I see there is, when you look at it side on, there is a kind of shaping there. There's also a shape when you look down, a kind of quite defined egg type shape. So what I'm going to do is I've drawn that side profile, I've created a surface that goes both ways. So that kind of covers that kind of spout top. So that's that. And then I'm going to create a sketch looking straight down. It doesn't have to be on any particular plane, but I use the base plane. And I'm going to try and recreate that spout shape. As you can see, it's not actually symmetrical in the reference model, but mine can be. So I go ahead and do that. So then I extrude up that spout profile. There we go. Then I can hide off the original. So there's the spout area in terms of surfaces. So now I'm using the trim command, and I have that kind of spout face, the top of the spout as a surface there. Here's the main body shape again. I'm going to use an offset, create a surface like that. I'm going to use that to now, because what I want to do is I want to kind of create a surface that goes from that basic main body, but flows into that spout that that spout surface I've created. So I'm going to use another loft, but first, before I do that, I'm going to use that kind of main body shape offset. That's a surface there. So I am drawing another little sketch, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to trim that main body surface using this slightly lower down curve surface. So here we go. I'm extruding this again. I'm going to use that to trim that main body. And actually, maybe I was a bit low down, so I can go a bit higher, get a bit close to the handle. And that surface is updated. So Okay, here we go, time to trim. So get rid of that top section, hide off that surface there. So I want to join those two things. I want the outer edge of that spout surface to flow nicely into that main body. So I select that edge, I do a surface loft, and as you can see, that top one is kind of free to do what it wants, but where it connects to the main body, I want it to be as continuous as possible. So luckily, that curvature continuous function has worked, and it's made something nice. You can see the line it's used to construct that spout isn't quite on the center. Could be many reasons for that. Could be worth going back and tinkering with that, but it could just be the way the maths has worked in the program. So now I'm filling in the bottom, and I have a kind of solid main body that has spout section integrated. What I'm doing now is splitting it down the middle, because I'm not a big fan of that line around the spout being a bit skew-if, so I want to try and make this as symmetrical as possible. I know the kettle's symmetrical, so I have trimmed everything to the center, and I've decided to make a new loft from that half kind of profile down to that half there. So do curvature continuous again. Okay, so I've got a new surface that this time I know is, I'm pretty sure, close to the center line in all regards, and then I can mirror this over and make a solid out of that, and then all the kind of features and lines are on the center line. So I'm just knitting it together, going to mirror it over and make solid out of that. There's my main body with a spout. And here I've combined the handle with the main body. I'm doing a little bit of a cheat here, because an easy way to kind of have the handle flow into the main body nicely would be to use a fillet. I think to help the fillet along, I've combined everything, and I've split it again down the middle, because the fillet struggles to go around the entirety of that oval where the handle meets the body, but it seems to work a bit better when you do half of that. So again, it's going to be symmetrical, so I've done that, and I've done that on the lower one, and then mirror that over, and then we've got something that looks kettle-like. So now I'm going to work on some kind of lid, some stopper for the kettle. So I have this solid or for the main body that from a while ago that was pre-spout. So I've offset that by 6 or 5 mil, just to have something that sort of nestles nicely inside. And I'm now going to use that spout surface to maybe trim it down a little bit. I don't want the stopper to be that tall, but maybe the section that kind of comes out of the kettle, maybe 20 or so mil. And I'm also going to offset that surface down a bit to act as the bottom of the stopper. So I'm just going to trim the top of that. That lower offset hasn't quite extended past the, it doesn't quite extend past the shape. So I going to use a little bit of an extend surface function just to bring that out. And now we can do that trim. I think it's okay to do that. So there we have a stopper surface that can act as the beginning of the side of it. So now I'm in the side view. So now I'm going to use a sketch on that center plane. I'm using the project or intersect function in Fusion Sketcher to grab the profile lines that are down the center line. I'm drawing a little spline here. I'm going to make a nice curvy top to this stopper basically. So there's a simple spline. I'm going to make it tangent to those intersect lines. And yeah, I think I'm happy with that. Something along those lines. Kind of comes up and it kind of makes a flattish top, a little bit of a curve. So that's good for that direction. I'm now putting a plane to create a profile that goes sideways, because ultimately I want to make a kind of loft surface to create the top of this stopper. So I have created a plane that is parallel to the front and back plane, but using the dot on the spline, just, you know, for tidiness sake, I kind of want to join up things where I can. And I'm using the intersect function again, and I've created a spline there. So as you can see, there's a kind of nice network of lines. Now I could potentially use these lines to create a loft, but they would all share a kind of central point, and I think in surfacing that's a bit of a no-no. So I'm going to use a little trick here. It might become apparent later on. What I'm doing, I'm just extruding some of these useful surfaces just directly straight. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to place a plane at the top now, at that very top point, and then I'm going to offset that plane ever so slightly. So there you go, I've dropped a plane right at the top, and then I'm going to offset that plane maybe literally 1/2 mil down, hide that top plane. And then I'm going to draw a sketch. And then I'm going to trim these surfaces using that slightly offset plane. Great. So now I have a plane. I'm going to draw another sketch. This is going to be a top kind of patch profile for that. I'm going to use these extrudes, these handy extrudes here, to position these spline points. And then I want it to be symmetrical, so I'm going to make those horizontal, those spline handles horizontal. Just setting that up just to make sure it's working. There we go, those are horizontal now. And there's a little bit of a bulge there, so I'm going to just shift these handles a little bit just to make it less bulgy. Okay, super. So now I can make my loft for the shape that's coming from that current section up to very nearly the top. Select that profile. Profile 1, Profile 2, join that nicely, Profile 3. Then I'm going to use these guide rails, that new sketch that I made at the top there, and that existing profile at the bottom. There we go. So we've got a nice surface there. I'm going to hide off those little extrudes. We don't need those anymore. So now we've got a fairly nice shape for the stopper with a kind of hole in the top. What I'm going to do, I'm going to mirror these over. Mirror faces, use center plane. And then I'm going to fill that patch in the middle. Oh, sorry, I'm going to knit these things together. And then I'm left with that patch in the middle, and I'm going to make sure that is not just connected but curvature continuous if possible, and that'll be as flowing as possible. I'm going to knit that. So now that's all one piece, and then just fill in the bottom. Knit that together. And there's our stopper. So just for a little bit of extra work, I'm going to create the thickness, create the cavity within the main body. So actually what I did was I rolled back to a time before the handle was joined to see if I could offset that shape I created, that surface I created that was the spout joined to the main body, and it seemed to offset fine. So I actually have that now. Then I roll forward. Just trimming a little bit off the bottom, because you can imagine I want to have a bit of thickness on the bottom of the vessel as well. And I'm extending the top just a little bit to make sure that I'm definitely trimming that if it's protruding out of the solid, then it'll definitely cut it. I was having some issues trying to fillet the bottom of the thing. I needed to knit it first, so that was an error on my part. But yep, made a little fillet on the bottom. So this is now a surface that I can use to split the main body. And there we go, we've got a sort of internal space inside the jug. And then I wanted to put a fillet on the bottom, but that fillet I put on the handle at the bottom was kind of interfering with things, so I decided to delete that earlier on in the tree, put that fillet on the bottom, and then re-add that. So I'm kind of lucky that that worked, kind of. But yeah, that's roughly speaking close approximation of that kettle model.